You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. I'm Tim Dooner, joined by Jill Carney. Jill, how are you today?
Doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
Jill, 2018 looks poised to be the year of emerging technologies in logistics. We're seeing software to find lowest cost carriers. We're hearing buzzwords like the Uberization of freight. We're hearing terms like OTR optimization. Tesla just unveiled their electric semi. We're hearing about autonomous vehicles. We're hearing about startups trying to begin a freight marketplace. We're going to cover how all of these things tie in together. But Jill, since this is our first show, let's give a little bit of an intro and a little bit of a background on yourself and Aborn and Company.
Great, thanks. So Aborn and Company was established in 1988. We are freight pricing experts who help our clients reduce transportation costs and bring visibility to the supply chain. Companies tend to hire us because they have a freight spend. They're not sure how it stacks up in the market. They're worried about customer service and carriers providing the right transit in the right lanes. Customers are complaining they're not getting shipments on time. So in addition to lowering freight costs and bringing this visibility piece in, we also tend to help companies solve a lot of problems as it relates to working with carriers. I've been with the company since 1993. I started really just in the operations client support, one of the partners here today, and we are a growing, exciting time for us, along with all this new technology coming in. It's a great topic to be talking about today.
And you look at technology and the way it's disrupting industries and has been disrupting industries for years, from the music industry with Napster and then, file sharing and online network sharing with movies. And then it's moved into things like the medallion industry with taxis, and you're seeing Uber. And now we're hearing terms like the Uberization of freight coming into our marketplace, and even Bitcoin, which is a technology that's shaking up currency. So you have Tesla, who's trying to disrupt the trucking industry as well. How do all these technologies come together and converge, and what do they mean for us moving forward? For a while, it seems like our marketplace, the logistics field and the freight forwarding field, was protected, or at least a little bit sheltered from technology moving in. And it's obvious that it's high time for some disruption in here. And now we're hearing about startups pouring a lot of money into these different programs and into this different technology. So what is 2018 going to look like?
Right. And the interesting part of this technology coming in is these are technology folks that are looking at it and investing it that for a very long time never even looked at transportation. So it's an exciting time. And I believe that these technologies are needed. You can only get access to the visibility of supply chain in a limited way. And so bringing some of these technologies in is really important if you're trying to manage and run your supply chain. The issue becomes, again, all this technology is coming in. If you don't have any real freight experience, you want that technology working for you in the right way. And I think that's, the discussion for today is, what do we have, right? We have these low cost routing solutions. We have this digital freight matching. We have this pool distribution optimization technology. How does it all fit together? Where do you start is really what our clients are asking of us. How do we make this all work? We could do a whole topic on, you'll see a lot of very large organizations who have private fleets. How do they manage them? Can they manage their private fleet program in the same place they can manage their outsourced transportation and bring all that visibility into one place, and then have this other technology for low-cost carrier, for digital matching, whatever it may be coming in to really make sense for a shipper, receiver, or a large organization? And I think, we could maybe break them out. I think there's some pros and cons to all of them, and, maybe offer some advice and recommendation on the back end as how would you look at this if you packaged it all together?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons that I think it's so important for us to cover this moving into 2018 is it's not just a few startups in Silicon Valley that are looking at these things. You're hearing really big names putting money behind this. You have Amazon for one behind it, people who get things done. You're having Elon Musk from Tesla, who's working on the electric trucking side, but really trying to get to autonomous trucking as well. You're hearing the founders of eBay, the founders of Priceline. So many big names are getting involved now. So much money's pouring into it that it's bound to be right around the corner. So it's high time that we did educate some people on these. One of the things that we're hearing most about right now is the lowest cost carrier. What exactly does that mean? How does that work? And how is technology being applied to that?
So this technology is usually a spot where you can go and put in the characteristics of your shipments, load in all of your outsourced transportation freight rates. You find this technology in a TMS, which is a transportation management system. So I'm a shipper and I go into my technology and I put an order in there and it will pop up in that day based on my ship date of all my negotiated transportation providers, what cost that shipment is, what the transit is, and then I can select who I want to use. For companies that are smaller that don't have this TMS functionality, this low-cost carrier service can also be provided. There's Unis shippers, the C.H. Robinsons of the world. There's this technology where you can use it to do the same thing, to run through this low-cost carrier option.
That sounds a bit like a freight marketplace. And traditionally, when you wanted to get rates, you would go through your own carrier pool, or you'd go through a broker who would have their carrier pool. Where are the rates coming from that would be within this system?
There'd either be negotiated rates that you have that you're uploading into the system, or you would be working with an outsourced provider who would then be going and buying transportation rates and offering them to you via this technology. And it's good, I think when you start looking at who does this work for, I think a smaller shipper with a smaller spend. The issues we see around this low cost carrier are a couple of things. One is we believe it's really important that you build a strategic partnership with your carriers. So if you're in this low cost carrier model where every day you're deciding who you're going to use based on cost, one day you may be using carrier A in a given lane, and the next day you're giving it to carrier B. Your customer is then seeing multiple carriers show up for deliveries. You're seeing multiple carriers pick up at your docks, so that can cause some congestion. But you're also putting yourself in an environment where you're not building these strategic relationships with carriers. So it's difficult to negotiate rates with them, one, because they don't know what to anticipate. Two, service can suffer for that reason. Given that on a given day, a carrier doesn't know what he's getting and you don't understand the carrier's line haul operations, you could be sacrificing service for this low cost price every single day.
So you're saying that this technology would probably be most applicable for shippers who are using lanes that are entrenched in the spot rate market.
Correct.
So not a ton of volume, but when they have it, and now they would have some visibility, and now there would be some competition between the carriers.
Correct. And maybe not have a large freight spend. You could live in this spot market if you had a smaller freight spend. You'd have one portal to go to put all your shipments in and get them all routed, but not really have any negotiated outsourced supply chain solution. You're just depending on this environment to tell you these carriers are available at this rate, and on any given day, you're deciding the decision on routing.
And the benefit to the shipper is that instead of having to go through a broker and deal with their rates and their lack of visibility there, they would have some transparency and some clarity there. And for the carriers, they wouldn't be limited by which brokers you use. They would be able to open themselves up to the entire pool.
Correct.
Of shippers.
Correct.
So what happens over time? Do you think that would drive down rates? How do you think that would work for these types of shippers?
I think over time, again, you're probably giving up service. You're probably causing some more operational and process issues by using too many carriers, I would believe is like the biggest con. Over time, would freight cost reduce? Potentially, but it does, even though they're negotiated rates, you're still almost in the spot market. So in a given quarter or a given 6 months, you're utilizing one carrier more than the other because this carrier is continuing to offer you the lower rate. That other carrier is going to come back and say, okay, we need to have a discussion around our rate because we're not getting the volume that we were anticipating.
And where does this carrier pool come from? Who's involved with this? Who's doing these moves? Where are they being sourced from? And how are these particular technologies going out? Are they themselves the ones that are sourcing the carrier pools?
And this is almost a question too for this whole digital freight matching. But before we go there, just in this lowest cost carrier environment. So these technologies providers are coming in and they're saying, hey, we have this technology. You load all your rates in it. You'll get the lowest cost carrier every day. So those rates are coming from your existing relationships with carriers or brokers, and the technology is provided in order to manage all of that in there. But I think also this speaks to the question of, does this work? And is this a good profile? Again, it really speaks to if you have a little bit of expertise in-house or can look for it externally to really manage a supply chain, we believe that that's the better way to go. the technology is great. It's just using it in the right way.
Now, you've mentioned this a couple times about if you have significant volume or if you have enough volume, you should establish those carrier relationships. So I think a natural question there is, how much volume is enough volume to start establishing carrier relationships? Does it have to be on specific routes? How would someone go about that? And just to clarify a little bit more, what's the tipping point where someone would not need to use this software anymore?
Right. Again, it's a bit of a loaded question. If you have a $500,000 a year freight spend, but it's in 4 lanes, you really want to look at negotiating set rates and utilizing technology to load rates into it and bring visibility to it, but not necessarily to rate shop. If you've got $1 million spend, and again, it's over 20 lanes, it probably makes sense to do some negotiated outsourced transportation on your own. You still need technology to support you. Again, it's just using it in the right way. You know, I think with this lowest cost carrier, one thing that does make a lot of sense here is, let's say you have this $1 million freight spend for less than truckload. But what happens is, a couple times a month, the frequent shipment going to customer ABC becomes more of a volume. It's heavier, it takes up more space on a trailer. And the LTL carriers have these cube capacity rules, so they don't really want that shipment. And what they're going to do is just overcharge you for it. And this low-cost carrier model, if you set it up where that volume shipment would go out to the spot market and then bring you back capacity and a rate, which is almost this digital freight matching process as well, then this type of technology makes a lot of sense.
I can see why it makes sense for the shippers. They get that transparency. They get to remove themselves from the broker market where they can't see all of the rates. They have to trust one particular broker or another, or have to do what most people do nowadays, which is send out an email that's, BCC to 10 different brokers, and they just take whoever comes back first with the lowest rate.
Got it.
But
Yep.
Why would carriers want to get involved with this, and how big would the pool actually be?
Right. So this is interesting because for all of this technology, whether it's your digital freight matching, your spot quoting, right now, 2016, this was a $711 billion market. And of that, the truckload market was, I think, $676 billion. Only the top 20 carriers or top 50 carriers handled less than 20% of that market. This truckload market is really fragmented. So there's a lot of carriers out there, maybe with 4 drivers, 6 trucks, 4 tractors, and they're small. They don't have sales forces. They're not out banging on doors looking for freight. So it really is a benefit to these types of carriers where this technology now allows them to go in and post capacity, and these shippers can go find capacity. And I think that's this technology is a big pro in this market, given that the broker environment can be really tough. So if you can get your hands on a local asset who can handle a truckload run for you within 500 to 1,000 miles and do it repeatedly and do it well, this technology of matching carriers and shippers is a real benefit to those type of carriers and shippers.
So it's similar to like Priceline or airline flight finding tools. Why would you use it? Well, because it opens you up to however many users use the system. So that's the real benefit there to the carrier.
That's right.
And right now, it's almost a little funny to talk about because capacity has been so strained, but that obviously isn't always the case. So that doesn't mean you ignore the technology when it's being built in the background. But plus, when capacity is so strained, this could be a huge benefit to carriers that aren't large or don't have huge marketing departments. They can plug right into all of that demand instantly.
And even those larger organizations, you see so many times where the team responsible for carriers in a supply chain, they're in a corporate office in Iowa, but they have outsourced 3PL warehouse and distribution. So you've got freight moving in markets that you're physically not in. So finding assets and finding good service providers when you're not in the spots that these lanes are moving in can be difficult. And I think that's also where this technology can help these folks find capacity and find it in the right place at the right time.
This ties into a very similar piece of technology that's coming down the pike, which is the Uberization of freight. It's the digital freight matching. I think the significant difference between the two is that this seems to be even more of a consolidation type system, even more of an LTL system. I have a couple of pallets in my warehouse. I need them to move relatively quickly, relatively instantly. Where does this idea come from? And is that a right assessment of what the Uberization of freight is?
So I think you're going to see also that truckload environment in this digital freight matching as well. It helps shippers find carriers that's mainly supporting freight that is bucketed into the spot market. You're seeing like the convoy logistics coming in and the Uber coming in. And again, they're calling it digital freight matching. But in some ways, they are acting as a broker as well. So the way you're paying for these shipments could be different. But the idea of the technology is we're going to have these carriers have this technology. So they're posting where they are, where they have capacity. And you as a shipper can go in and post your shipment to find this capacity is, how it works on a high level.
So they're trying to build, Uber's not just trying to be a player in there. They're trying to be the broker. They're trying to build the freight market themselves.
Right.
So is Amazon or these other, I know a lot of startups are vying for that, and I imagine the bigger companies at the top will buy them out. And then do you foresee a situation where there's the Uber of Uberized freight and the Lyft of Uberized freight? Will there be a couple markets? Will there be one market?
I think it gets really difficult when you start talking about large organizations with large freight spends. So today, keep in mind, this digital matching of freight is for live pickup and live delivery. A lot of companies out there are working with drop trailer programs where carriers are dropping trailers, they're loading. I mean, there's a very set schedule of how these shipments are going to move. There's determination between over the road versus rail. So there are very robust, strategic, complicated supply chains, right? And currently, this digital matching isn't supporting that. If you look at the overall spend of $711 billion, on a high level, I would say that digital freight matching is probably grabbing less than 10% of that overall spend, because it truly is, like you said, these one-off shipments, or my outsourced transportation provider has zero capacity for the next week. I'm going to go see if I can find a spot rate and get this thing going earlier. So there's some issues into the operational routine of the supply chain using this technology. And, there's also no predictability. So it's almost I'm going to match a load by chance. And a lot of corporations don't have that flexibility. Walmart is going to give you an order and this is your RAD date. You are required to deliver this shipment on this day. And they're not the only ones, as we know. So I don't think right now this technology can support most of the negotiated outsourced transportation. But it certainly doesn't mean it's not coming. These folks are thinking ahead, and we will see technology evolve as this technology comes in, and companies are starting to really support supply chains with these visibility tools, with these looking for assets versus brokerage, and this digital matching.
So Uber works because the app itself is simple, but it also works because it's slightly cheaper than the existing model of taxis. It's more efficient. You get to see when your driver is going to be there. But that's the key too. Whenever you need a driver, there's a driver. Whenever a driver needs a passenger, there's a passenger, because there's a big enough network. So how exactly is the carrier network? I know this feeds into our last topic because they're very similar, but to scale this type of business, to scale the Uberization of freight, you're going to need carrier participants, right? You are. Not only that, you're going to need carrier participants, and then from a company client perspective, a supply chain manager, his criteria is not just cost. His criteria, there are many layers to how he's selecting a carrier provider. It's service. There's so much in the world right now of this customer preferred routing, where you may get the right transit at the right price with carrier ABC, but that customer will only allow carrier DEF in. So that doesn't matter. So I really think where technology needs to be is building more of almost a shipper profile that has a lot of layers to it. You go have your taxes done online. You go through a rigorous shipper profile, right? Your customer profile to get your taxes filed. You almost need to see something like that in the market for transportation. Again, because supply chains they're more and more complicated. Inventory levels are tighter. A lot of companies are going into this outsourced warehouse and distribution model. So there's less controls around how freight is moving in and out of a warehouse. With technology and visibility,
that's going to just help companies source their shipments the right way.
So the ELD mandate just came out, and one of the biggest qualms that have come out about it, and the biggest complaints have come from smaller carriers. Do you think that, as much as they're against technology there with the ELDs, that a technology like this could be a benefit to them and could help reduce some of those costs for them or help bring their bottom lines back up? And how so? How would they need to get dialed into a program like this?
Absolutely. I think it makes a ton of sense for these smaller carriers. You know, they've had to make this investment in the e-log devices. And if they're willing to do that, then the next step for them should be, how do I get more visibility to my market? How do I let people know that I have capacity in these lanes? And that's where this technology, I think, will play a really good role for these kind of carriers. And the reality is, we need these carriers, right? We need them because, again, there's not enough capacity out there. You know, people don't want to drive trucks anymore, as we're seeing now with Tesla, and companies are buying these autonomous trucks. They've got pre-purchases on them to bring them into their supply chains. But that's going to be a while. They're coming. But right now we still need drivers, and we're going to need them for a long time. So having these smaller carriers brings some visibility, again, to their company and where they're located and where they can help shippers is just a win for the shippers and the carriers.
So ultimately, like an Uber app, it provides more transparency, it provides an immediacy, but it also provides a freight marketplace that people are used to now. People aren't really picking up the phones or doing faxes anymore. They're used to Uber. They would be used to a marketplace like this. Society's been trained to dial into something like this.
You got it. And the other thing, it's easy to use, right? You have this app on your phone, whether you're a driver or a dispatcher, and same with the shipper. The ease of use of these applications is wonderful. We don't have that today. We have DAP boards where we can go out and look for capacity. We have transportation management systems where we can bring visibility to shipments. And they're getting better at, okay, let's make this as easy to use as possible. So if I'm a sales rep outselling a product to a customer and I knock on their door and they say, hey, wait, we're supposed to be getting a shipment today. We haven't seen it yet. Can you check on it for us? You know, there's now some applications where you can go do that. And so you're right. When you look at like the Uber type app, to have those applications that are that easy to use in transporting freight is just a win for everyone.
Brokers themselves could use them too, because I know, for having worked at a broker, that just like you call them and they have to go to their carrier network pool, there really is no freight marketplace for them to plug into either. So they can't just simply go in there and pick the lowest cost one for you. They have to go to their pool, or they have a book of numbers for the week, or whatever it may be. So it could simplify a process for a lot of people on all gamuts of the supply chain.
You bet. And as a broker, you're offering that good technology to your supplier carrier assets, where they can then just drive more visibility and ease of use in trying for a broker who needs to cover a load with an asset.
And just to sum this one up, you would caution against using this the same way you would caution with the carrier rate matching, though, right? That if you have the significant route density, this probably isn't the best way to go, because with this, you're still stuck fighting a spot market. Right. And you're not building those carrier relationships. So this is more of a one-off, last-minute type of usage, new lane type of usage.
I agree. I believe that it is. You know, it really is finding capacity based on chance. So there's no predictability, one. And two, the operational piece of how I am handling the pickup and deliveries of shipments. You know, if I'm requiring carriers to drop trailers, this digital freight matching isn't the place I'm going to be able to go source rates or carriers. So I just don't think it's there yet.
Let's switch gears for a second. There's another technology on the horizon, OTR optimization. What can you tell us about OTR optimization? What are the companies that are involved, and what are the tools aiming to do? And for those who don't know, what is OTR optimization?
Sure. Optimization tools aim to bring in all shipments to one platform and build that platform to make the best routing decisions based on the shipment characteristics, length of haul, when the pickup and delivery date is, the cube of the shipment. The goal of the optimization tool really is to reduce the weighted cost per mile. So move shipments in a shorter transit for less cost. And so under the term optimization, you could look at taking in LTL orders and looking at optimizing them to fill a truckload, bring it to a final mile distribution point, and then source that final mile delivery out of there. That's something we would call pool distribution. Or it's going to take all your orders in, and it may make a decision to say, you know what, you've got Minooka, Illinois and Skokie, Illinois. They each have a 9-pallet order. You should put both of those orders together and deliver in a truckload stop-off model. Those are some examples of optimization, but that's the basic fundamental of the tool is you're trying to reduce your weighted cost per mile, and you're trying to get freight. A lot of times with these optimization recommendations, you're traveling less mileage and you're getting less handling. So a customer gets freight sooner and it's handled less. I think there are some issues scaling this into the operational routine of a supply chain. For example, if you think about a large client, a large shipper with a substantial freight spend, they need drop trailers at their facilities at all times. These drop trailers are important to the carriers, too, as it makes them more efficient. Drivers can pull in, drop a load, pick up a load, and leave, versus waiting to be loaded and go. If you move towards a live scenario, you lose the cost and operational benefits of something like a drop trailer program.
So how do companies use this technology in the marketplace?
They either use this technology, it's usually an add-in into a transportation management system, and they're either going to use it in a live environment where all their orders are going to come in, and they'll have their standard routing and rate and carrier in the lane, but then they'll run this optimization on top of it to say, okay, this week it makes sense to make these other decisions based on lowering the weighted average cost or building a truckload stop-off to improve service and or price. Or they use the optimization on historical data. You know, some companies aren't ready for this live environment. And what they'll do is they'll stand up the optimization on the back end, load in their rating, load in the contracts and their routing instructions. And then they'll say, and they'll ship everything. And then they'll look at it and say, okay, what could we have done? And, you know, maybe test it for a few months to see repeatedly if there are optimization opportunities, and then what does that do to transit and price when we use it? So really, again, with the goal of getting improved transit and lower cost.
What are some of the benefits of pools, multi-stops, things like that?
The benefits are you have the ability to move freight faster at a lower cost, so you can improve transit. Also, in some cases, you may not be improving transit, but you're getting less handling, which means your shipments are showing up in better condition. You know, in a typical less than truckload environment, depending on how many miles you're running, that could be running through a couple of different freight terminals where that freight is being offloaded and unloaded onto another line haul schedule for the final delivery. So it definitely helps you improve handling as well.
What could be some of the downfalls and the pratfalls and the hurdles of using this, though?
Right. So this is where we really spend a lot of time. And I would say that's over all the technology, but especially with this optimization, you have the technology, but you really need to set the technology up in the right way. You really need to set the technology up to run in the right way. Meaning, typically we'll have what you might call a load planner who gets all the orders into the transportation management system, and then they run this optimization on top of it. So the technology runs it for the load planner, and it spits out, here's what you should do today with these orders or this week, depending on how much time you have to plan. And if it continues to process and optimize things that can't work, because no, I can't use that carrier to this customer, or I could build this truckload stop off, but I can't get a date change on this delivery date. So there's so many layers to a supply chain. I still think it's important. You can buy all this technology, but you really want to make sure it's working in the right way. What we see with this optimization piece is that folks love the technology. They buy it as an add-on to their TMS, but they don't put any logic around it. And so every day, the person who's responsible for managing the load planning of the orders, they essentially will give up on this optimization technology because it doesn't have enough in there and enough logic in there to deal with the exceptions, which is the everyday life they're dealing in when shipping an order. So I would say that's probably the biggest downfall.
So this technology is something that we're all going to be using in the very near future. But how does it all tie in together? And is there one in particular I should start focusing on first? What's closer on the horizon? Is that dependent on who the shipper may be?
Right.
There's a lot going on here. So can you bring this back home for us?
Sure. I think step one is bring visibility to your shipments. From shipments in transit to also your contract rates, your routing guides, so that in a transportation management system, you can load in all your rates, all your routing, and have the ability to bring visibility to orders in transit, right? That's kind of step one. Step two is, once you do that, you have a lot of analytics to say, well, am I paying the right rates? Am I using the right carriers? And working with that data, because now it's all in one spot. Now let's negotiate those rates and make sure they're with the right carriers. And we've addressed all the customer routing. Into that TMS tool, you now have your outsourced supply chain, or if it's a private fleet, or you even have your own carrier managing. A lot of times you find private fleets are carrying other people's freight as well. So you've brought all that visibility into a transportation management system. Now you can add on this other technology, whether it's show me the lowest cost carrier outside of the route guide, show me in a given lane the lowest cost carrier in that lane, and I may make a different decision. Or give me the ability to take a spot shipment and get it out into this marketplace for asset capacity, a volume quote. And furthermore, let's optimize some of this stuff. Let's see what this looks like.
So my transportation management system may point out areas where it would make more sense to Uberize my freight, to be using the spot market, and other lanes that it would make more sense to do some carrier negotiations with.
Correct. Yeah. And you could even build that technology to say, if I have a shipment that falls outside of less than truckload and ends up being 9 or more pallet positions or more than 750 cube, that's when I want to make that decision to go to this digital freight matching process and see if I can find an asset for us. What you will do is you will pay less for that shipment, and you will find an asset who can manage it in the right transit for you. And I think, the only other area we didn't cover too much, but when you talk about wrapping this all up, is then some benchmark analytics.
So you could take some of this data, this historical pricing data now, and you could track it from these spot rates that Uberized freight, and you could actually start benchmarking your own supply chain when you start tying these systems into one another. Is that correct?
That is completely correct. That's the one area we haven't talked about yet, is the benchmarking analytics tools that come with these types of programs, using your historical data. And you can even, with a technology provider, use their client's historical data. Now, it may be anonymous, but it's going to be like lanes, like industry. And so you have the ability now to analyze and benchmark all of your pricing in all of your lanes.
Now, we're familiar with benchmarking on a high-tech and a low-tech level, mostly low-tech beforehand. And how often would you find that your benchmarking would reveal pricing discrepancy or ways to find lower-cost carriers, something that this would help someone define with technology? But you're saying you see it quite often because people don't have the analytics available to them. It's a very emotionally driven marketplace. I don't like this carrier because they did this one thing wrong once, so they get eliminated from the pool. Where now you would actually have some big data, like most industries do behind their things, really backing decision-making, and it's not left up to chance or to emotion.
It's so true. And you're right, that still happens today, where a guy had an argument with a driver 10 years ago, and he never wants to see that carrier in his door again. The other piece of the benchmarking tools, though, is to really look at it from a mode perspective, and also, is it a negotiated rate, or is it a market spot rate, right? So when you start either buying outsourced benchmarking functionality that comes with data, you want to make sure you're measuring the right data. We've seen where, a client, our supply chain will report to the VP of Ops that, we have this opportunity and you're not going to get it. How come? Well, no, that's a spot rate. We're talking a negotiated this number of loads every single year. That benchmark on a spot rate is apples and oranges compared to an outsourced transportation rate.
You bring up a great point there. A lot of times in the brokerage world, when you're looking at RFPs and looking through RFPs and RFQs, brokers sometimes will play shell games, or they'll move pricing around, or there won't be accessories disclosed that shippers may think need to be included. So this would give even more of a value discovery, more more of a benchmarking perspective on the rates there and understanding where the value lies.
Yes, and when you start talking about that data, understand if you're in this type of TMS functionality, you're getting all of those accessorials broken out where you have a real good look at, this is my line haul, this is what I paid for fuel surcharge, there was a lumper, there was a sort and seg, there was a detention charge. That's where that due diligence with the technology comes in to really capture those costs in the right way so you can measure it in the right way and also negotiate it in the right way, right? You may have a client who says, well, we don't pay fuel surcharge. You do. It's built into your rates somewhere. And it may be to your benefit to actually negotiate that accessorial versus just saying, I'm not going to pay for it. You give the carrier all the risk. What does he do? He increases the rate. So with that big data, you get a good look at costs, what you're paying for, and what you should be paying for them.
Jill, if you'd like to learn more about emerging technologies in logistics, or if you're concerned about future-proofing your supply chain, who should our listeners get in contact with?
The best way probably to get in contact with us would be to email info@abornandco.com. That's abornandco.com. We have the resources and would be happy to help. And keep in mind, we're consultants. So we don't work for carriers. We don't work for brokers. Our benchmarking technology is there, but it's also layered with this freight expertise. So we understand the market. We understand the carriers and who are the carriers in the right lanes to handle your freight based on who you're shipping to, where you're shipping from, and what constraints you have at your facility or at your outside warehouses. And we do that in a flat fee model. We can step you through them, and we can also show you the technology and really what it looks like. And does this make sense to start taking steps into this emerging technology, and where's a good place to start for a given company to start looking at it and bringing this visibility in?
And we have a special promo for listeners. Send an email to info@abornandco.com, abornandco.com. Put consulting logistics in the subject line, and we would be happy to give you a complimentary consultation on the future strength of your supply chain.
We would, definitely.
If you'd like to visit our website, that's abornandco.com. You've been listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. For Jill Carney, I'm Tim Dooner. Bye, Jill.
Bye, Tim. Thanks, everyone, for listening.